Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's AGU Professional Development webinar called Become the CEO of Your Own Dissertation, featuring our guest speaker, Dr. Eileen O'Grady. I'm Eric Hankin, the Student and Career Programs Manager at AGU, and I'll be your host today. Presenting today is Dr. Eileen O'Grady. Dr. O'Grady is a certified nurse practitioner and wellness coach who uses an evidence-based approach with people to reverse or entirely prevent disease. She is an expert on intentional change to adults, emphasizing the importance of extreme self-care and how to identify and remedy a life that is out of balance. She is the founder of the School of Wellness, devoted to cultivating wisdom and the practice of extreme self-care and self-leadership in McLean, Virginia. Today, Dr. O'Grady is going to walk us through some of the health-related pitfalls resulting from a dissertation that's spiraling out of control. And we'll talk about how strategic planning and thoughtful self-reflection can help make your dissertation experience a valuable opportunity for professional and personal growth. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Eileen. Eileen, take it away.
Great. Well, I'm delighted to be here, everybody. So really want to talk today about what happens when we avoid, attack, or accommodate things that we don't want in our lives, particularly around the dissertation. And then want to talk a lot about leadership skills that the CEOs use to move big things forward. And then finally review high-level personal accountability. And I'm very curious about you all and what stages you're in and what you're coming up against. So I define these CEO skills, if we look at people that are really effective at moving the ball down the field, is shipping product, that at the end of the day, we actually have to make something happen and produce. And we have to ship, and we have to have our own deadlines and move things forward. The second one is the ability to self-regulate our emotions, our habits, eating, exercise, all of that. The third is the ability to prioritize and say no to the things that are dragging us down, that are draining us. The fourth is the ability to telescope, to be down in the weeds and also up in the sky looking at the big picture, and going back and forth to those two levels is a way to change perspective. And finally, what CEOs are highly accountable to. They advocate for themselves and their project in a really effective manner. So those are the sort of the 5 areas we're going to go through today. And before I do that, I want to talk about my better introduction. Eric gave one, but I have one that really talks about how I got into this work, and some warnings from a nurse practitioner on the other side who sees people at the end of life or at midlife with a really nasty preventable illness. And then I want to share a true story about a family member of mine who's ABD, and just provide some more context before we move into the CEO skills. So this is me last year, my first visit to the Grand Canyon. And what I like to say is that our own brokenness is often the best part, like the Grand Canyon is a crack in the earth, and that I, at midlife, was in a terrible place, taking care of patients, seeing the patients every 5 to 7 minutes, and I wasn't doing any of the things I was telling them to do, like exercising, eating well. I was drinking too much, driving too fast, and not really present in my own life. So a lot of the work I'm doing now is my own rebuild, where I realized I was going to crash and burn and get very sick with a chronic preventable illness, like lots of members of my family. So I come from a place of overwhelm. I have 3 graduate degrees, and I did get through a dissertation. So those are the credentials that, you might really care about in terms of how I moved through this and how I frame this. So there is this tsunami of chronicity in this country. As you all know, I've heard about this. So the World Health Organization has discovered that there are 4 behaviors that are largely responsible for early mortality and morbidity across the world. So the United States has basically exported our KFC and Pizza Hut lifestyle and Marlboro overseas. And so we're seeing these 4 behaviors: insufficient exercise, bad food, alcohol abuse, and tobacco are the number 1 causes of death around the world, and they're entirely preventable, and they eclipse infectious disease and malnutrition. In the U.S., the 3 top killers are heart disease, which is largely due to lifestyle, cancer, 7 or 8 kinds of cancer are directly related to lifestyle, and medical errors. So all 3 of these are also highly preventable. And my hope for you all is that as you're building your careers and your lives and you're doing your dissertation, is that this is when habits start to get formed, and that you don't go down this road and develop a preventable chronic illness. And there's so many things we can do to prevent that. and that lets stress. So I think of ABD, and I know I'm not assuming that any of you are ABD, that you're somewhere in the process. That is the ultimate definition of being stuck. And I work with people who are stuck in all kinds of self-defeating behaviors, eating destructively, not living, being able to accomplish goals, not being able to get books out that they've been writing for 10 years. But to me, the ABD is the ultimate source of stuck. And there's not a lot that's been done on this population of people that haven't finished their dissertation, that they've kind of dropped it. They did all but dissertation. 56% of people that start doctoral programs become ABD. So that's a huge number, and I don't want you to become one of them. Because really it is no man's land professionally. It's not something you can really put on your resume. It's sort of like you have a doctorate, but you don't really, so there's not much you can do with it. And I'm sure, I couldn't find any, but there must be long-term health implications around your own self-efficacy. When you set out and enter a doctoral program, there's some part of you that feels that you have the capacity to finish that. And so what we're really needing in a dissertation is grit. It's not so much intelligence and IQ, it's the ability to persevere through all kinds of obstacles thrown your way. So what I have seen in my own family member is his self-efficacy has dropped significantly on all different parts of his life. So I think this is so important for you to get this thing done. And it requires the deployment of all of your resources to finish, to ship product. So it's not just your intellect. It requires a lot of other things. So just a quick story about my cousin Vinny. Literally, I have a cousin Vinny, and he was up in the Northwest getting a doctoral degree in some environmental study. I don't remember exactly what it was. Submitted his proposal, finished all of his coursework, did a proposal for his dissertation, and his committee members didn't like it and recommended a complete revision. Well, so cousin Vinny just walked away from it and just said, screw it, and didn't finish it and just left the university and left. And he has been struggling mightily ever since to find gainful employment. He's had a marriage fail. He's had all kinds of problems in his life. And I often wonder if he had just stayed, so a barrier was thrown his way. He got thrown an obstacle, which we all do in life. And what would have happened in his life, if he had actually overcome that obstacle and worked on a different proposal and worked on all those interpersonal skills he was having. So for this one N of one, this has been a really tragic situation for him. And I just don't want that to happen to you. And it won't after this talk. So one of the things that you might be experiencing is what we call the Kenneven framework. It's a Welsh term describing habitat. And this might resonate with you in terms of what you might be feeling. So we all go to school and we learn, if we look at the bottom right hand here, the simple best practices. You have a cause and effect, and you basically are sorting and categorizing. So you have this situation and you do this. And that's what we call best practice. And it's very predictable and everyone agrees. The next order is a complicated place where it's good practice, but it's not exactly simple. And so you often need experts. And if you get enough experts on it, you can actually solve the problem. So, building a rocket ship is a complicated endeavor. So it requires good practice, but it requires a different skill set, lots of expertise, and you have to really look for cause and effect. It requires a lot more analysis. And then we jump over into the unpredictable space where things become really complex, which is, I'm going to guess, is where maybe many of you are habitating for the most part in your personal and professional lives, where you can only see cause in hindsight after the fact. You don't see it while it's happening on the ground. And it requires a lot of probing and asking questions and being very nimble on your feet. And it requires emergent practice. You have to be more, innovative in the moment. And then we move into chaos, which is novel practice, that you're trying to claw your way back to the unpredictable space, where you're trying to claw your way back just to complexity, because chaos is there's no relationship between cause and effect. So this is an unpredictable space. And so what happens is when we approach problems that are really complex with a best practice approach, we can often quickly move into chaos very quickly. So you might be thinking that maybe some of the stress that you're feeling is that the mindset that you're using is not matched to the environment that you're in. And that when we're in unpredictable environments, and I can just say across the board, speaking to groups all over the country, funeral directors and healthcare people, is that, everyone's being asked to do more with less, and it's a very complex world. And so it requires us to go into these situations not knowing, actually not just being curious and not having all the answers, even though, we go through school being expected to have the answers. So that's a very quick framework introduction. And I thought we would do a poll right now and just find out from the group listening where most of you spend your time, in which one of these spaces. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Eric.
Yep, stand by. I will launch the poll in 3, 2, 1. Launching poll. Here we go. So where do you spend the most of your time? In the simple, the complicated, complex, or the chaos? We will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Closing poll. Okay, and so 47% of people say they are in the complex, 33 in the complicated, 13 in the chaos, and 7 in the simple.
Okay, so lucky those simple people. That's awesome. So most of you are in this complex space, and so that requires a different mindset, and it requires for you to to have a lot of control over your own emotional life and your own emotional intelligence. It requires being in the moment and not knowing. And that's a very hard thing for someone who's cognitively very smart and has a high IQ. It's a very hard thing to embrace, to not have the answers. And so it might be explaining some of what you might be feeling. So we'll go through this a little bit more. And I've come up with a list of my own experience talking to people and doing some literature review on what gets in the way of somebody completing their dissertation. What are some of the snags? And the number one thing that I hear and have seen is interpersonal conflict with a committee member. There's something going on where the two of you are not communicating well, or it's shut down, or there was a conflict and it didn't get handled well. Then we have the power gradient issues, and this is when, obviously you're the CEO of your dissertation, but your committee members have a lot more power in this than if they were your employees. But in many ways, they are your employees because they are being paid to see you through to completion. That is their job, to do that. And so, yes, they may throw up erect barriers for you. They may make it hard, but their job is to see you through to the end of this. So it's very helpful to approach a dissertation like that you're the CEO, and then you have these employees that are there to help you move this through. And so you might be very intimidated by somebody who's a powerhouse in the field and has this really incredible intellect. So you may accommodate or cower or not advocate for yourself because that power is creating some fear in you. Broken agreements. So people agree they're going to get a draft back to you in 4 weeks, and 6 weeks goes by and it's not there, and then the broken agreement isn't addressed. So that's really a deadly thing to allow to go on as the CEO of your dissertation. And then you might be breaking your own agreements and dragging and not getting drafts out when you said you would. Lack of structure or clarity. So when people are not really clear on what the next steps are, they're kind of stuck in some mud or murkiness. They're not really clear. And then mission creep. And that's a really big one when people are trying to, earn a Pulitzer, I guess a Nobel in your field, for the work that they're doing. And they've really, their dissertation has kind of seeped out and gotten bigger than it was intended. So I'd be really curious in the chat box if any of you have a conflict or an issue that's causing you distress that's actually not on this list, because I'd be curious to know what it is. This is why I like live presentations, so I could talk to you. So if you do, just stick them in the chat box. So most of the way we handle conflict growing up is from what we learned in our family, unfortunately. So if you go back to when you were a kid and how conflict was handled, you're probably doing the same thing right now. And so these are 3 common, what I would consider dysfunctional reactions to conflict. So first we have our accommodation, is when we contort into a pretzel to get, to try to please people. This is sort of the people-pleasing place that we operate from. And over time, and I don't know what your average age is, but at midlife, this absolutely stops working, being a contortionist and trying to please everybody. So that's not really the best way. And then what often happens is when you accommodate and then you feel resentful and angry, and then all those cortisol hormones and are coming out and kind of eating away at your organs. It's very, very corrosive to us to accommodate and do things we don't want to be doing, and where the other person isn't accommodating at all. It's very one-sided accommodation, and that's very, very bad for us. And then we have attacking, which is also not healthy. Somebody feels like they're walking on eggshells around you because you just can't hear any feedback at all and just attack them. Or we just avoid. Probably the most common one, we just avoid conflict. We put our head in the sand. This isn't happening, and we move on. And so that what happens is we train people to treat us the way they treat us. And so the minute somebody does something and we don't advocate for ourselves and stick up for ourselves, then we're allowing that behavior to go on. So this is probably the most common one I see with women in particular. So here are the CEO skills I'd like to go through with you. So regarding shipping product, and this comes from Seth Godin. He's one of the only bloggers I read every day. He sends out a really short email every day on shipping projects and working with startups and CEOs on not letting that inner critic and that voice tell us that we're not ready, we're too small, it's not right, the perfectionism. So you really need to know what's the project, and that it has to be manageable and finite and time dated and doable or failable. So a lot of what you might be doing is testing hypotheses, and is it a yes or it is a no? Did it fail or did it not? And doing tiny sub projects are part of that. And being really clear about what your proposal is, and if you can't write it down, you don't have a project. So that crispness and clarity on what you're looking for. And then what date does it ship? And so one of the things that I did that really helped me a lot was about a year before I defended my dissertation, because it was very difficult to get my committee all together. They were super busy people, as I'm sure yours are, is, a year from now or whenever you're anticipating finishing, having those three people lined up and available for that day, because that you're going to find when you're ready to go, it might take another 6 months to get all those people in the same room together. So that really helped me, because we know human nature does really well with deadlines, that we just really need a deadline, and we have to create our own. So when does it ship? And then we do backward planning from there. So if I'm going to defend on this date, when do I need to have, all the chapters done and the analysis and the discussion section done? And then who is responsible for shipping it? And the story here is that only you are. I mean, only while you're working with other people and you're collaborating, you are responsible for getting that thing shipped. And so we have all this resistance, and these are bad reasons to allow stalling. That it's too late, it's too soon, it's risky, it's boring, it will offend other scholars. So if you're taking somebody on, let's review, let's give it more time, it might fail. My competitor will steal it, or it opens up to other people stealing my idea. It's been done before, or it's never been done. People will laugh. It opens me to criticism. So these are all what we describe as the inner critic, where there's nobody actually having the conversation, but it's our own voice that's telling us, that's wanting us to stay small and be small. So be listening for that inner critic and shutting it down. So I like to think of it as, taking some duct tape and stuffing it in the trunk of the car. Maybe because I'm from New Jersey. So we all have an inner critic, but you don't want it to be driving the bus. So what we know from lots and lots and years of research is that this emotional intelligence eclipses IQ in terms of your success over time. Being emotionally intelligent is really going to dictate how you are going to go forward in the life and be successful. And so we want to make sure that you can cultivate these things like self-regulation, and that's a lot of what around the work I do, that we often can't pour from an empty cup. That I talk to people that are totally overwhelmed or completely depleted. They have no original thoughts going on because they haven't done these really basic self-care things. So you really want to be focusing on your own self-regulation so that your ship is righted and that you're as generous as you can be in the world. So that we can't say enough about developing that emotional intelligence, because, having habits, if we all think back to when we were kids, our parents had to tell us to brush our teeth. And at some point they stopped telling us because it just became a habit. You don't even think about it. You don't wake up and say, I don't feel like it today. You don't have an argument. You just do it. So our habits measure us. We're spinning our own fates for good or for evil. And there's a lot we can learn. And I'm going to be doing another seminar on living in balance, or talk more about habit formation. But just to be really clear that you should be working and not arguing, even if you're in a dissertation process, about these really basic things that our bodies need, and not doing what this kid is doing, because he's going to really metabolically mess his body up eating that way. So I like to think of Ben Franklin as the ultimate CEO extraordinaire, where he spent every morning, he would take these 13 virtues and he would work on a couple of them at a time for a month or so. And he would write about them and say, today I'm going to be frugal, and I'm going to be more quiet. I'm not going to be such a blabbermouth. And he would focus on those things. This is how he described his virtues. And so what he did, he sort of outsourced his self-regulation by focusing on it in the morning. He was able to go and develop the post office, the fire department, the University of Pennsylvania, glasses, and a number of other things. So what we know about CEOs is that they run these behemoth organizations, but they're fitter than the rest of the population. They're not crazed, they're not harried, they have time, they take the time for themselves. So if you think about you taking on this role as the CEO, that you need to have white space in your life, and you need to have some bedrock behaviors. So what I want to say is that willpower is not reliable. It never has been. It's a muscle that weakens over time. And so what you want to cultivate are bedrock behaviors, things that you do not negotiate about. And I think of these categories as really important, or you can add or switch out whatever you like. And the idea is that we should be moderating what we're letting into our lives, because that is really the only thing we have control over. So what are we watching? What kind of literature are we allowing into our bodies? What kind of food? Is it food, that, is not Frankenfood that our grandparents would recognize? Are we moving our bodies? Are the people in our lives generally positive for us? Do they bring out our best, or are they draining and sucking the life out of us, emotional vampires? So we are the sum total of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And so look around and see if you need to do some editing, pulling people in and pushing people away. And we can do that very, very easily and intentionally. And are our conversations meaningful? Do we have 1 or 2 of those deeper conversations every day with people, or are we just staying in gossip and frivolity? And then uncluttered space. Is our home, our office, is it a sanctuary for us, or are we walking into a space to do our dissertation, and we just feel like we want to turn around and walk out? And I put all of this on a foundation of sleep that I speak all over this country, every field you can imagine. And this sleep is a huge problem for people. So whatever you can do to get enough sleep, because it affects every cell, every hormone in our body. And there's a reason why driving while you fall asleep is way more dangerous than being drunk, because when you're drunk, you have a delayed response. And when you're asleep, you're actually not responding at all. You're totally checked out. So nothing really good comes from a sleep-deprived person, as anyone can tell you with a new baby. So that's a really important to think about, not shortcutting, especially the sleep. If I could, just make that one plug. So what I see here, many of you working in this really complex environment, is that it requires adaptability. That's our greatest strength. So if the tree is really rigid and the storm comes, it's going to snap off. So I like to think about creating a life that doesn't need escaping from. I had a client once who was driving to work, and she had this terrible job and this partner she couldn't stand working with. And she saw a sign for the beach, and she wanted to just keep going and drive away from her life. And so we had to do a lot of work to rebuild her life, so that you don't want to escape from it. And also your dissertation process, looking back on it, so that it's not so torturous and more difficult than it already is. So we have another poll here, and I'd be curious to know, which bedrock behavior do I neglect the most? And I'll turn this over to you, Eric. We have sleep, exercise, food, screen and literature policies for yourself. I like to think of having some technology policies, and uncluttered space.
Great, so the poll's launched. I'll give folks a couple more seconds to answer. We got results trickling in. And this time I'll remember to share it to everyone, because I forgot to do that.
Okay.
Okay, and we're gonna close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing, and let's share. Okay, so you can see 55% said screen literature policies, 18% sleep, 14% exercise, 14% uncluttered space. No one said food.
Okay. All right, so so now we know where people need to spend some time on. I talk to people all day long about, turning the phone off, having a Sabbath. So most of you are really struggling with that, where it's infiltrating our lives and distracting us. It's a huge distractor. So what really effective leaders do is, I know some Silicon Valley executives who don't use email, for example. It's just a time suck and they don't like it, which is like sort of astonishing that you can do that. And so what can we do? What kind of policies can we create where we're in more decision and more deliberate about what we're letting into our lives and turning things off, turning all the notifications. I have my phone on grayscale, so it's less appealing and drawing me in, batching emails, only going on, a few times a day, or when you're working and you're writing your dissertation, everything gets turned off and you just have a 2-hour kitchen timer and that's it. That's all you're allowed to write for that day with no distractions. So that sounds like a really good thing for this group to focus on. Thank you. And so this is another skill set, is this ability to prioritize. And we see this in effective CEOs, where if you, the jar on the left is when you put all the little things in, the big things don't fit. And the jar on the right has the same contents, but you put the big rocks in first, those bedrock behaviors, and everything fits. So what I like to think about prioritizing your bedrocks is that you're not negotiating your self-worth, your value, that these are things that each human body needs most days. We don't want to say every day because then we slip into perfectionism. But these are things, sleep and movement and, all those things that we need to live our lives and be as generous and effective as possible. Eisenhower uses a matrix, and this is another prioritization tool, and it might be worth doing after this webinar, and making this kind of square. And you look at the gray column on the right, where we spend a lot of time focusing on, even if they're urgent matters, but they're interruptions, they're distractions, meetings without agendas, gossip, too much TV, and carrying frenemies or people that really don't have your best interest. So what can we do to sort of eliminate or greatly reduce this gray column? The one on the left, the pink column, are things that, we can't avoid. This is just life helicoptering into our life. Like, things just happen, they drop in, and we have to deal with them. But then what we really neglect is this yellow box. The things that, require, that don't have any urgency to them, that don't have a timeline to them. And so what we know there's some quote, I can't think of it now, from Einstein, who talked about being bored. You might notice that you get some insight actually when you're in the shower. It's because your cognitive mind is turned off. So, creating some rest in your life, and exercise and sleep, and do more of these and put them on your calendar. So we know that, CEOs will not skimp on these things. They'll get a really good workout every day. They'll focus on their relationships or the long-term project. So this ability to telescope is a really big coaching tool that we use when people are down in the weeds. And I think that the definition of writing a dissertation is that you are in the weeds and you often know more about the topic than anybody else, and you really lose perspective completely. You just completely lose what's important, what isn't, what's new, what isn't. And so this ability to go down in the weeds and then to go up in a balcony. So you're stuck in some place, dissertation place, and you can't move forward. One of the really great things to do is to go up on a balcony and say, okay, I'm looking down at myself in this dissertation, and what is the problem? Where am I stuck? What's the problem? So it totally changes the view. It's like looking at the grain of sand and then being up and seeing the whole beach. So it's a way to change our perspective. And I have this beautiful short film I'm going to show you in a second on changing perspective. But I think in the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to come out with all kinds of new science on meditation. And I think if we could find just a corner of quiet every morning, and just, be grateful and to ask for what you're looking for that day, whether it's to get you unstuck or to move forward or finish a chapter or a data collection point or whatever it is, to just have some quiet in our lives so there's no noise. We're finding that that's when the wisdom comes in. So when we're going 100 miles an hour, there's no wisdom in that. We're just doing. And so if you could train your mind, and we know that there are monks who have been long-term meditators, and they put them in MRI machines, and they don't even have a startle reflex. So the brain is very plastic and can change. So if we're feeling very overwhelmed or stressed out, finding quiet, it seems counterintuitive, like doing more is often not the answer. So to find a corner of quiet every day, just even 5 minutes, there's all kinds of apps and guided meditations on YouTube to help you with this, but you may find your answer just by asking it in that quiet time. Like, what's my next step? What is it that I'm supposed to do next? And see what comes. So I want to show you this short film, and it's around finding perspective and this idea of being made to feel small, but in a good way. So it's not in a humiliating way by using, most of what you all are studying. So I'm going to put this on. Just give me a second here. Okay, from the School of Life. Okay, so the final skill set, so I hope that film was, you weren't in a car driving, that you could see it, is highly accountable. So if you can think of a person who showed high level accountability in any situation, where just sort of took ownership and took responsibility for whatever was going on, that's what we want to see in a CEO. So personal accountability is the mindset that results happen because of your actions, not in spite of them. And accountable people believe they can choose their own destiny. So there's very little blaming going on when we're highly accountable. and finger pointing to other people. And I like to say, no crying on the yacht, because this idea that, you may be in some really bad place with your dissertation, but the notion of self-pity, what we know about it is it's very, very corrosive to the host, to ourselves, and to everyone around us. That even if you have some hideous situation going on, some terrible diagnosis, some terrible problem with your dissertation, you can always find something that's far worse, some person in a far worse situation. And there's nothing pro-social about self-pity. So even if you have a terrible thing going on in your life, it's really important to find a cul-de-sac out of that and into a more empowered place where you're actually taking responsibility for what's going on. So yes, you can hang there for a day or so and feel sorry for yourself, and then it's really important to not stay stuck in there, because we all know people that take on this victim role in life, and they're very draining to be around. And so your happiness or engagement in your dissertation or at work is not related to your circumstances, but to the amount of accountability you take for your circumstances. So this dissertation is yours. Yes, there's other people you have to rely on, but it is yours and you are responsible for it. So one of the things that Cy Wakeman, who this work is from, talks about the ego and how it creates drama and waste. And so she was put in charge of a hospital. She was a psychologist, and she couldn't believe how many times people came up to her at work and complained about facts that were immutable. The ER is backed up. So-and-so called in sick. And so people would spend a lot of time, in fact, 2 hours a day, complaining about facts. And they're blaming circumstances for things not going well. And so they were gossiping, they were believing and spreading made-up stories, they were resisting feedback, and that everyone's vote should count as equal. She thought that the person working on the floor should be the same as the CEO making the decision. So when we have engagement without accountability, we get entitlement. And so she really wants to really cut the drama, and the idea of venting is actually not very helpful. It's just like watering the weed. You're staying stuck in the problem, and there's usually no solution to that. And so she did the study and found that people spend 2 hours a day. She calls it BMW driving, bitching, moaning, and whining, complaining about immutable facts that can't be changed, arguing with reality. It creates and she considers this employee waste, and it feeds this storyline. So one thing that we could all do in our own lives is just ditch the drama and stop complaining about immutable facts. That's a really helpful thing. So some ego bypass tools are identify what you know for sure. My dissertation is stuck on chapter 3, or I'm stuck on this data collection procedure, whatever is going on. Name exactly what you know for sure, and don't tell any story around it. Do what would be most helpful in the moment. Offer to help rather than to judge what the problem is or whose fault it is. So some of the drama sounds like, my colleague's behavior prevents me from doing my best work. If admin did their job, this place would run like a clock. I was excluded. It's unfair. I don't agree with. These are the kinds of things where we're not taking on responsibility. We're sort of blaming our circumstances for the situation. So the idea here is to stay in your lane. And when we do that and we fiercely protect what is ours, amazing things can happen. So high accountability people ask all day long, what would great look like right now? So you may have some hideous problem with your dissertation, some stuck place, some awful thing going on. And instead of going into the storyline about how bad it is, what would excellence look like right now? If somebody was really good at what they did and really owned this process, what would they do? It's a really great question. And there's some math we'll do let's do a poll. What % of your day is spent around drama? Self or others? None, 10%, 25, 50, or more than half my day. Let's get a sense from this group.
Okay, just launch the poll. We'll give folks a few more seconds to answer. Okay, and we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing, and now let's share the results. So overwhelmingly, we have 71% said 10%, 25% said 17. 17% said 25%. Sorry,
okay, got it.
Yeah, it was a quarter of the time. And actually, we did have some folks who said none, but we also had some folks who said more than half their day.
Okay, all over the place. Yeah, hard to read from that. So there's definitely drama, and I'd love to talk to the person that doesn't have any drama. That's great. So one thing you can do is the math. Where look at your current performance, and 5 is like you're doing great. You're continuously broadening your knowledge. You're setting and reaching your goals beyond the expected. So you give yourself a 5 for that, and a 0 if you're not doing so well. So there's an equation to determine your own accountability. And then the future potential, again, on a 0 to 5 scale. A 5 is you're president of your association, you're engaged in cutting edge research, you attend every training available to get better and more knowledgeable. So that you give yourself a 5. And if you're not doing any of that, maybe you get a 0. And this is really to determine your value to the employer, to the project. And then the emotional expense is kind of flipped. So a 5 is when you rage about the program, the faculty, the committee, the harsh and hurtful judging of others. You spend a lot of time in that space, you get a 5. And you get a 0 if there's no emotional expense, that you're not doing that drama. So the math is you do 5 plus 5 minus 5 times 3. So this emotional waste is very, very costly to you and those around you. So they multiply it by 3. So this person, for example, is a -5. She's costing a lot. She's not adding value due to all this emotional waste. So you may be great in your performance and your future potential, but if you're adding all this drama, you're really taking away from the project and the people around you. So I want to just say that anyone can say anything to anybody at any time. So lots of people get into trouble with their dissertation committee. And I'm from New Jersey, and I tend to be very direct, but these skills can be learned. So with any kind of new relationship, you get what you ask for. So if it's a new relationship, or if you want to do a reset and things have gone south, I would like to have a great working relationship with you. I would like to be the best this doctoral student you've ever had. What would it look like for me to do that? And ask that question. I would like to be the best boss you ever had. I'd like to be the best parent you've ever had. What does that look like to you? So clarifying expectations and no guessing. My pet peeves are when people give me false deadlines. They tell me they need something by Tuesday, and then it sits on their desk for a week, and I worked all weekend to get it to you. So that doesn't work for me. I don't like that. Make it safe and identify deal breakers. If you move to a new school, or if you leave this university, then I'm gonna not be able to finish. Whatever it is that's going to make you leave the university or leave the job. So what are the deal breakers? And when you're working on a team day in and day out, everybody should know these things about each other. And so prevention goes a long way in some of these relationships. And sometimes it is a restart when when you need to have a new conversation with people. So does it need to be said? So restraint is an important tool. Does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said by me now? So if you're feeling like you want to lash out at somebody, this is a really great tool to use in the moment to hold back. So here are some hacks, because I know we're running out of time. And what we know about writing dissertations is if you have an 8-hour day to kind of quote unquote write your dissertation, it's a disaster. You want to set, a 2 or 4 hour limit, turn all the distractions off and write, because what we know is that people do much better once they start writing, once they get into it. It's an immersive experience. It's not something you can do for 20 minutes at a time. And it's best when you stop writing and the timer goes off, to stop mid-sentence and to maybe write a few sentences in the document describing what you're doing next and where you're going and what you're thinking, what the next steps are. So when you open up the document, you know exactly where to go and what to do. And you want a backward plan. So anticipate, when you're going to defend and what are some of the tiny steps you need to get there. Set an alarm to go to sleep and don't skip on it. So all the sleep experts are saying we should not be waking up to an alarm. We should be going to setting an alarm to get ourselves into bed on time. Name and address broken agreements and other infractions. So when people you're in a relationship with somebody, whether they're your committee member or not, and they said they're going to do something and they don't let that go unsaid. It just fosters more of that. Ask for help early and often, and when you ask for really specific help, beautiful things happen. I see people getting into all kinds of trouble because they don't like to ask for help. Set a defense date, get your committee on the calendar, and there's a great resource called the abdsurvivalguide.com, and they have all kinds of essays and things like that when people feel stuck. And then I want to tell you another story about this guy, Ben Dean, who founded Mentor Coach. It's one of the coaching schools I went to, and I have nothing to do with him now, but he's also the author of the ABD Survival Guide, and I want to tell you his story because it's really powerful to me. He was stuck in ABD hell, and he was really in great distress about it. He just couldn't get it done. And so he found a colleague who had graduated 2 years before and paid her to sit down with him at a Starbucks weekly for, I think it was 6 months or maybe it was 4 months. I don't remember. And so he had an accountability partner, right? And so she would kind of go over and look at what he had done that week, and then they would come up with another goal. So the next week he would come back and meet with her, and they would walk through. And he estimated that it saved him $1 million in lost income that he would have, like, if he did not do that, he doesn't think he would have finished. And he just had a colleague really that he used to make him accountable and to help him break these tasks down into small, biteable chunks. And he became so enamored with it. He was a psychologist. He decided he liked this coaching model so much. So if you can find a friend or get a coach or somebody to help you get unstuck, that might be a good investment if you really are feeling that you're in that space. And so I'd like you to, in the chat box, just write down something that you heard today that you want to make sure you remember. And I also have I send out these occasional wellness pearls, really short, brief paragraph on some of these concepts. And a recent one was dealing with a-holes and bullies. Tools to decrease stress and live a great life. And I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, etc. And there's one thing I always like to end with: well, there's no gardener, there's no garden. So this garden doesn't just happen. In order to cultivate a beautiful life, it requires pruning and editing and pulling things forward and cutting things back. And that's what we have to do continuously in order to have a good life and to get this dissertation done. And that the final thing I want to say is, before I take questions, is that you have a lot more power and agency in this than you realize. And what I see is it's often untapped and unrealized, that you have a lot more power, and I want you to tap into it. So, Eric, I'd love to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Eileen, for that great presentation. So we have some questions already in the chat box, and I'll read those while we wait for others to type theirs in. If you're wondering where to type, in the control panel, you'll see the chat box there. You can just type your questions in, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So first question is, what's your recommendation, Eileen, to someone who has that type A micromanaging advisor? How should they deal with that person?
Yeah, well, sometimes, if things aren't working well, it might be having a reset of a conversation. Sometimes it does require accommodating that, to get through it. So it would really depend. Because I think of it as like the hero's journey. You're on this journey, and there's all these obstacles getting thrown in at you. And so I would say, maybe it's a conversation with that person, a more honest, fierce conversation about how you're experiencing them, or how you feel like you can never get anything right, and is there something I'm missing? That's always a good, to just build in more candor. I'm noticing that you're finding all these small things, but I'm worried about do I have the big picture right? So it's almost to call them out on it, but it's really all about tone. It's a great question.
Great. Another question: how can we deal with totally hands-off advisors? So, and I had an advisor who had, very important things going on in her life outside of work, and so she was dealing with those as she should. But as a result, she wasn't paying as much attention to me as a normal advisor would. How do you deal with that hands-off advisor?
Yeah, well, maybe you'd schedule an appointment or a lunch or a coffee and come with your questions and batch them, because you think about a really busy person. That if you come with them with some very specific batched questions, that would be one way to do it. Or maybe you find your help from other sources. Maybe it doesn't have to be your committee member. And if it's kind of running dry and nothing's happening, you can also fire committee members if they're not reading your stuff and getting you feedback in a timely way. You are empowered to let them go if it's really not working. But I would think making it joyful for the person, making it fun for them, to just take them out to lunch, buy them coffee, food always helps, and just say, I need to pick your brain for 30 minutes and get it on the calendar.
Great. So another question: I work full-time, and at the same time I'm finishing my Ph.D. So it's hard to prioritize and find balance in my life. What do you recommend to do? How do I find my bedrock behaviors?
Yeah, well, that's a great thing. And I did that for a long time, and I did end up going part-time because, I think some of these programs say, oh, you can work full-time and get your doctorate degree. You can, but, you might be in the ICU by the end of it. Like, it's not really good for you to do that. And so if there's any way, you could, and obviously you would have if you could have cut back. But these small things, we know when I work with people, it's no different who want to lose 100 pounds. It's just every day chipping away, getting up early in the morning and writing, getting that thing done. And it feels to me like your life will begin when you finish this dissertation and getting it off your neck and keeping it as simple as possible. So I don't know what to tell you. If you need white space in your life to do bedrock behaviors, I've just talked to someone the other day. There was no way she could begin an exercise program. She had about an hour and a half that was unscheduled a day, and that didn't include meals. And there was just no way. She has to wait to have a different life. And I think it was Rumi or somebody that just said, you must change your life, when things aren't working, that you can do this temporarily, but in the long run, it's a disaster. So that's a roundabout way. I'm not really answering the question. Just get the dissertation done. Get in, get out, is what I say.
Great. So going back to advisors, so this time what about the absent-minded professor? So the question is how to deal with an advisor who asks you to do something one week and then changes what he wants the next week after you finished what he wanted in the first place.
Yeah, well, I would probably keep a running, like just a bulleted list of things to summarize the meeting, and make sure, that's in writing and that you did all these things. That's crazy making. And sometimes that's just this bizarre hazing process I've seen people do. They just want you to jump through hoops. Maybe they feel like you haven't, been hazed enough. And so I'm not sure what the motivation behind that is, if it's really absent-mindedness or are they just running you around. And so to me, that would just be holding him much more accountable, or her, with a list of bulleted items that you're going to change and what you did with a response.
Okay, great. We still have time for a few more questions. So the next one in the queue has to deal with back to time management. So everyone has times of the day where they're most efficient, but writing a dissertation may not necessarily line up with those times. Same on the research side. You may have to do research during times of the day when you are not very efficient. How do you cope? How can someone cope with that? What sort of mechanisms can they do to change their time management skills?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like a two-part question. I think it's really about, when we all have our best moments and we're just full on, all pistons are going. And so if you can't make that writing happen then, like doing the hardest thing when you're at your best, that's what you want to try to do. Nothing is really coming to mind if you're having to do it at 10 o'clock at night. So you might be better like getting up first thing in the morning, looking at your whole day and figuring out when are you at your best and what can I move around? And I often think that people have a lot more power, right, than they realize. So if you have to ask your boss to change your hours or to take a 3-hour block during the middle of the day to write or whatever it is, we don't get what we don't ask for. And I've been astonished how many times I've asked for things and I'm shocked that people have said yes. Shocked. So when we're really specific in the ask and maybe it's temporary and we have a good ask, what can we do to change our lives so that we are moving forward every day? I'm not answering that very well. Sorry.
I think that was good. I know from personal experience in grad school, I had friends who were geochemists and they needed to get on the scanning electron microscope to do their research. But those are expensive. There's only one in the department. And the new students had the time they had to book, they'd have to go in at like 1 a.m, which is just awful. No one has that as their optimal working time. But unfortunately, they kind of had to bite the bullet and deal with it. It was just the way that department.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also like. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Eric, but it's also like the obstacles or the thing that they get thrown in your way, and just expect them and say, "Oh, this is interesting. Now I've got to do this sleep deprived at 1 a.m." And so that's why so many people fall away. Is because there's been an obstacle, and there are some of us that just roll up our sleeves and says, well, damn it, I'm going to figure this out. And other people just say, like my cousin, I'm out, And so what I don't want that to happen, because all you have to do, I believe, is show them that you know how to do original research and nothing more than that. Is that wrong, Eric?
No, that's usually the case.
I mean, that's really the case. And so you might need to scale it back like most people do. They start out with these lofty ideas, and then it just gets, reality sets in, and it has to be smaller. And then, you know, you do your more meaningful work when you get out, when you're not under all this thumb and having to align all these people up that have different, you know, committee members fighting with each other, all kinds of nonsense goes on. And so to me, get in and get out as quickly as possible.
Great. So not everyone has the benefit of having that kind of hierarchical committee where you have your advisor and then the rest of the committee under that person. Some people have to deal with kind of co-advisors, and those co-advisors may not, you know, their points of view may not always match up, and it can be a little confusing. How do you, and you know, this goes outside of dissertation to just general work environment. How do you, what skills can someone have to help them manage two supervisors?
Yeah, well, so I think the fewer people you can have on this team, even if you pulled someone in, the better. So just make your team small and then make it smaller again if you can. If you have any choice in that, make it small. And I guess I would sort of force a meeting and just say, okay, there's a conflict, two conflicting ideas, you two duke it out. And at the end of mine, unfortunately, I had totally surrendered. I was saying, just tell me what you want me to do. Like I just wanted to get it done. And so I just let them kind of direct it at that point. I mean, I didn't feel that strongly about it because I wanted to get out. I wanted to get out of it. And so I would make them, you know, have make the two of them work on that somehow, some way, you know, and it's a lot about tone or whether, you know, and I always believe in verbal face-to-face or phone versus any kind of texting. If you have any kind of problem whatsoever, particularly on an emotional level with any committee member, especially when there's a power gradient, never ever use email or text or anything. It's a conversation. It never ever will get solved through emails. It'll often make it worse.
Great. We still have a little bit of time, so we'll do a couple more questions. So, how can someone deal with writer's block?
Oh, I guess there's supposed to be no such thing as that. And so there's a few techniques. There's a concept called morning pages where you just get up and just start writing, just free floating, like on a tablet paper, just start writing. Or you just look at a blank screen, you know, whatever, you pull up your computer and you're scheduled to work on your dissertation for 3 hours. And you just look at it and you don't do anything except you look at that screen. But oftentimes it might be going back to that you're not clear on what you have to do. I mean, to me, there's something else going on. Like you don't know how to analyze the results. You don't know how to write the discussion section. There's something that you're murky about. And getting somebody else to talk it through, maybe like a guide, somebody that's not going to be a pain to you, that's going to actually be helpful to move this thing forward. A colleague, a friend, a paid coach, there's dissertation coaches, all kinds of people out there, and editors that you can work with. But to me, getting clear, I think you might be murky on what you're doing next.
Okay, awesome. And to finish it up, so sometimes life gets in the way. Whether someone's getting married during their dissertation, while doing their dissertation, maybe you're pregnant and going to have a baby, or there's something in the family happens, whether it be terminal illness or a death in the family. What are some ways that you recommend folks talk to their advisors and their committees to you know, let them know that these, you know, that life's getting in the way and they want to, you know, deal with these
that you want to stop. Yeah. So that's tricky because I remember hoping to deliver the baby and then defend the same month, and I defended when the baby was 12 months old. That was my experience. So I was able to control when the baby came more than the dissertation for some reason. So I think it's just being candid, like really working on the interpersonal relationship so that they see you. And, you know, even if there's a vulnerability, you know, my mom is in hospice and I'm pausing. It wouldn't be an ask, it would be a tell. My mom's in hospice and I'm pausing this until after I grieve her loss, and I'll be back in touch. And then make sure when you do that, you write in your dissertation the notes of exactly what was coming next. Because let me tell you, it is really hard to go back 6 months later and figure out where you were and what you're doing. So if you do end up taking a leave an instruction manual for yourself, because that will be hard. And I'd say the same thing about your publications. Going and while you're finishing up your dissertation, if there's any way that you could get these publications pulled out of that tome and at least outlined and framed, because it's very, very hard to go back to it after you've delivered it, for sure, if that helps.
Yeah, and just to add some advice onto that, your advisor may not, know the school's policies, or may be disregarding them in terms of what the leave policies are. So you should, even before having that conversation, maybe go to the ombuds person or the dean of your college or your chair of your department to have that conversation, just to know what your options are legally.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, but the real message is get in, get out quickly, as quickly as possible, and whatever happens, do not be ABD. Call somebody, get some help. There's no need for that to happen to you.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to end it. So with that, I
think
it's been a really great webinar, some really, really useful information, and a lot of it had to deal with in the Q&A with living in balance, which will, as you mentioned before, you'll be discussing during your October webinar. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of repeat attendees for that one, and you can register for that one. In a few weeks, we'll have it up online on the webinars page, webinars.aju.org. The rest of the attendees, keep your eyes open for the follow-up email with a recording link. And if you haven't already, you can register for the next AGU webinar, which has to deal with sharing science in kind of plain language, called Amplify Your Science by Crafting a Plain Language Abstract. And that's going to be held on Thursday, August 30th with AGU's Sharing Science team. So thank you so much, Eileen.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Thank you all. Good luck.
Yeah, have a great day,
Bye.
everyone.